Hello, Half-Lifers. Today I'm here with Scott H. Young. He is a best-selling author from the Wall Street Journal. He is known for taking on learning projects. What was so interesting to me is I saw this concept of ultra learning. And I know you're used to seeing me on ski slopes or on the water, wake foiling, wake surfing, skiing. But part of the Half-Life promise is just doing more and learning more and engaging in lifelong learning. And one of the best ways to do that, I found, Scott really touched on a lot of these things. And so I'm hoping today, whether it's you want to learn how to play guitar, you want to learn a new language, you want to learn how to cook, you want to take a career transition mid-career and do something else, Scott has a lot of really interesting ways to inspire and to help you do that. And so with that, Scott, welcome. Thank you so much for spending time with the Half-Lifers. And we'd love to just learn more about this learning project. Is there anything about you that I left out that you want to share? Or should we get right to it?
No, that's pretty good. Let's jump right into it. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So when you look at taking on a learning project, like you've taken these things on, and when you think about kind of breaking out of your day-to-day, how do you think? What's an example of a learning project that you took on? How do you even get started?
Yeah. So I've been writing for a number of years, and the kind of thing that I guess I'm known for is taking on these learning projects. One of them that I took on in 2011, I called the MIT Challenge, which I wanted to learn MIT's four-year computer science curriculum, but instead of going to school and paying tuition and taking classes, I used their free materials they provided online, and I did it in over 4 years. I did it over 12 months. And a few years after that, I did a project with a friend where we traveled to 4 different countries to learn 4 different languages. We went to Spain to learn Spanish, Brazil to learn Portuguese, China to learn Mandarin, Chinese, and South Korea to learn Korean. And I've also done projects learning other languages. I've learned portrait drawing. I've learned quantum mechanics, all sorts of subjects. And so my blog and what I've really dedicated my life to has been figuring out how do you learn things? How do you approach tackling hard projects like this? And really kind of trying to inspire people to consider taking on projects of their own. Because I think for many of us, we get into a rut. We just do the same things over and over again and don't realize how much our lives can be bettered by taking on learning projects.
Yeah, right. I mean, I know for myself, I've tried to learn Spanish for about 10 years.
Yeah.
I've done everything from having flashcards in the house to talking to random people and just doing my best, but I've never quite gotten over the hump. And so, I got to know, out of those 4 languages, which one of those was the hardest, which one was the easiest. And when you think about taking on that learning project, if some of the Half-Life members were going to do something like that, how do they make time for it? And how do they get going in that process?
So I'll unpack that. So first, I would say that the hardest one that we did was probably Korean, not because I think of any objective difficulty, but just because it was the 4th one in a row that we did. And so it was, I think from looking back on that project, 4 was probably a little bit ambitious for doing them. We were definitely tired by the time we reached the 4th country on the trip. But I think what we were surprised at was that although 4 was quite a bit, 3 was okay. So I think sometimes you can bite off more than you can chew. But I think that often it's the case that you don't even know what your limits are because you don't go out there and see them. And so for many of us, we just think, oh, there's no way I could ever do anything like that. And you'd be surprised at how far you could go, even if maybe there are some difficulties ahead. And so for me, I think with this project, the kind of thesis of the project, which I didn't mention, was that the major difficulty to learning a language, in my opinion, is not so much a mental problem, like that you just can't remember the words or you can't pronounce the letters or things like that. Not to say that that's not hard, it is. But the major problem is often a social problem, that you don't get yourself in enough situations where you need to actually use the language to get by. And this includes not only being able to speak the language, but being in a situation where understanding it is necessary for you to move forward in a situation. And so for a lot of us, the language experiences we have are very kind of academic. They sort of stay in this classroom environment, which is sort of fake in a lot of ways, and we don't actually use it. Whereas the way that it's...
If you don't mind me interrupting,
sure, go ahead.
It's so true. because, you know, I've been to Germany a couple times, and I took German in high school for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can
Yeah.
say, Guten Tag, wie geht's? And I can say,
Yeah.
Hier gaat der, or Geh doch mal ran, you know, when the phone es klingelt. Putting those things into context when actually they're outside of the academic study, I think you call it transference, really difficult.
Yeah, and this is a major problem, is that we often think about learning as this sort of classroom activity, like that the goal was to pass a test and get a good grade and have the teacher draw a smiley face on your essay or something like this. And as a result, we're kind of been conditioned to see it that way, and we miss out that, well, the point of learning a language was to communicate. The point of learning a language was to understand and be understood. And so I think what we did, and sort of the thesis of the project, was that if you're traveling, so if you have the opportunity to travel, learn a language, I know that's not the case for a lot of people right now, but if you have that opportunity, one of the big problems is that you get to a country and everyone speaks to you in English because you're not very good at this other language. And so you form this little bubble around yourself of social connections, which are all in English. And so aside from maybe the occasional trip to the restaurant or, you know, to the grocery store where you have to interact with the cashier for 12 seconds, you don't actually spend any time speaking in the language. And so what we decided to do, the little trick we used, is that from the moment we arrived in the country, we're only going to speak in the language we're trying to learn. And the reason that that worked is because, yes, it's hard in the beginning, but all of the friends that you make are people who speak that language and are used to only speaking to you in that language. And so after about a month or so, it would be almost weird to not speak in the language because everything in your environment reinforces it. And so this is a big lesson that you can apply not only to learning languages, but to other things. The more that you can cultivate an environment that reinforces your decision to learn something hard, the easier it is for you. And so this is somewhat of a paradoxical idea, because making it harder on yourself in the beginning sometimes can set up conditions that make it easier in the long run, because you have this self-reinforcing environment. And so for a lot of skills, we kind of get rebuffed by them. Like we try to go in and do a little bit and it's hard and we just get kind of pushed out. And so what you're trying to do with language learning a lot is push far enough in that you get sucked in, as opposed to getting pushed out again. And I mean, this is definitely true with travel, but I think this can be true for a lot of skills that you want to learn, a lot of different things that you'd like to get good at. The more you can create an environment which sucks you in and draws you in and makes it really compelling and interesting for you, the better it is. And the more it's something where you're pushed away from the real thing and forced to do something kind of, you know, it's just sort of a little exercise. It just feels like homework. I think the harder it is to really engage with a new skill.
Well, do you think from what you learned, you know, for you, you were able to in a very immersive manner, go into those different countries and stay there for a period of time? For somebody who doesn't have the opportunity to go to a country for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever amount of time, they have 10 days. Do you think those principles still apply? Like if I wanted to kind of break through on my Spanish speaking, for example, and I was going to go down to Baja on a surf trip, or I was going to go walk through Spain or do something like that, those same principles, do you think would apply?
Yeah, they totally can. Now, I want to be clear. Obviously, if you only have 10 days of immersion in a country, you're not going to be fluent after that. But you could probably do a lot more than you think. I think that's the other mistake, is that there's kind of a conflation. Like, everyone wants to be fluent, but they don't realize that, like, to be able to be like, oh, I'm actually doing this in this restaurant, or actually doing this in this taxi driver, is quite different from like delivering university lectures in Spanish or Mandarin Chinese. They're quite different lengths of ability. And I think for a lot of people who want to learn Spanish, what they really want is they want to be able to, you know, go to a restaurant, order food. They should be able to have a quick chat with a local. They should be able to ask for directions. These are quite basic things, but even that is daunting for a lot of people. And so, you know, I'll give an example. I don't speak Japanese at all, but my wife and I went to Japan for 10 days. And I did just a little bit of Pimsleur, 1 month of Pimsleur. This is what I like to do to start prepping. So Pimsleur to prepare. So I just learned some phrases. And it wasn't even an attempt to do anything in immersion. Like, it wasn't even, okay, I'm going to only speak in Japanese when I'm there. I'm still with my wife, who doesn't know any Japanese.
Yeah.
But it was still an opportunity for me to, when I'm like asking people things, I'd learned how to say enough that I could say it in Japanese, and they would reply to me in Japanese. And it was just a very little bit. And so admittedly, 10 days is quite small, and Japanese is quite a hard language. But I think it's just sort of a proof of the general case that even if your opportunities are more limited, there's still a lot you can do. So you don't have to have full time for 3 months. Maybe you do if you want to be, speaking totally fluently and not have any issues.
Yeah.
You need at least that. But I think there's a lot we can do with even the opportunities that we're given. So I think the right way of thinking about it is that, yeah, maybe you're not going to be perfect after 10 days in Baja, but you'll be a bit better. And then when you go the next time, you'll be even better and even better. And so that's the right way to look at it. And I think you can go quite far with that mentality.
Well, I think with that mentality too, when you have this realization that I don't have to be 100% fluent, I don't have to be perfect to have a great experience.
Yeah.
But by doing it a little bit each time, you engage in this lifelong learning. And so, I might end up being fluent in Spanish, I don't know, when I'm 75. I don't care. I just want that process and that movement towards there. If we were to take that learning example and apply it to guitar, for example, I have a lot of friends and a lot of people who reach out. I actually play in a band, believe it or not. I'm a front man. I was never in a band until like 10 years ago. And I learned how to play guitar, but it took a lot of friends to kind of help me get through it. And I found some of the key learnings were having that guitar always available so I could practice it just, friction free, not in its case, not put away. And I had to get over the fear of actually playing the guitar in front of people. Still kind of concerned about that. always a little nervous about it.
Yeah.
But, I think, some of the things that you talk about in your process too is dealing with some of that. I really liked when you talk about fear and anxiety leads to, or is another word for excitement, like the relationship. Can you talk a little bit about, one, how to break through in terms of whether it's an instrument, and then two, how to overcome some of the fears or anxiety that you might have with it?
So I think the way I want to view it is that a lot of people are, how do I minimize fear? How do I minimize doing something that makes me feel uncomfortable or potentially frustrated? And I don't want to say that those are good feelings. I don't want to make the impression that, it's important to be really scared or something when you're approaching a goal. But I think the idea is that we want to try to minimize boredom. We want to try minimizing the I don't care about this feeling. And so I think when you're afraid of something, that's sort of also a signal that there's something that is emotionally resonant there. And very often the things that you feel kind of scared about are the things that you could be really excited about if they just had the valence flip. So the feeling scared to stand up on stage would also be such an overwhelmingly positive feeling to be on stage and have people cheering, right? Or that feeling of like, I'm going to make a mistake when I'm speaking this language would totally be this feeling of great accomplishment if you could have, a 5-minute interaction and it's only in Spanish and the other person wasn't like, would you like me to speak in English to you, 20 seconds in, you would feel great after that. And so I think the idea here is that trying to seek out these kinds of experiences, this is what life's about, right? But very often we recoil from them and we don't even realize we're doing it. We kind of recoil these safe sort of, it's sort of, it's not too hard. It's not too uncomfortable. I don't have to do anything that's outside of my comfort zone. But as a result, we also rob ourselves of these sort of, really magical moments where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this, And so I think that's one thing to kind of keep in mind is that these feelings of, that sounds kind of scary, that sounds kind of too hard, is not something necessarily to avoid, but something to kind of be like, how could I maybe make this so that this is something I could do?
Yeah. And, if we look at just taking it to instruments as an example, when part of this concept that you bring up around ultra learning is that you really go after it. Like you decide that hey, this is something I want to learn. I'm passionate about it. I'm excited about it. And so you take in a lot of input. You do a lot of as much research as you reasonably can do, and then make yourself somewhat accountable for the results that you're going to try to drive towards.
Yeah. So the idea here is that if you are a little bit more systematic about asking yourself, what's the best way to learn this? Because I think what a lot of people do is they don't ask themselves, what's the best way to learn this? They ask themselves, what's the easiest way to learn this? What
Mhm.
is the something that I can do that's super convenient? And the reason that I don't like starting with that question is because the thing that drives learning forward is feeling like you're making progress. It's those moments that I was telling you about that, like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing that. That is what makes you want to keep going.
Oh, it's
It's
yeah,
not just, oh, I've got 10, oh, I got half an hour a day where I'm just doing the same thing again and again and again. Like, no one wants to just do flashcards learning a language, right? That's not, you do that every single day. And I'm sure there's some people who are suitably dedicated, but for very few people, that doesn't create the pull to keep
yeah,
going. Whereas being in a situation where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I had that conversation. I couldn't have done that before. That is what pulls you forward. And so I think the idea that I want to promote is start by doing a little bit of research. And this is true for most major skills. It's true for languages, instruments, sports, anything. And just figure out, if you were to learn it well, what is the way that other people have learned it? How did they learn it? This doesn't tell you exactly what the right way to learn it is, but it gives you sort of a sense of this is what's required if you want to get good at this. And to take that seriously. And I know that sounds a little bit like, well, aren't we trying to promote doing something better than the status quo? But I think the problem is that a lot of people don't really want to face up to, okay, this is what I would have to do to get good at this. Like if I were going to learn a language, for instance, okay, well, I need to learn these words. I need to, work on my pronunciation. I need to have these
yeah.
sort of basic conversations with people. And so I think part of the problem is that sort of being unwilling to kind of look at, okay, what's actually required to start learning this, to be able to do the basics of this, to be able to get going with this. And I think once you can kind of keep your mind on that, it's a little bit easier to say to yourself, okay, well, if I wanted to learn a guitar and I had a month to do it, what will be the best way to learn guitar? And the plan that you make, even if you have to modify it to fit in your life, is often going to be closer to something that works than if you just start with like, well, what's the easiest thing I can do? And it may not even be something that accumulates into a skill at the end, or into something that, makes you want to keep going.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that you touched on, I know at least for my experience with guitar, and I think if I were
Mhm.
to take it and apply it to surfing or other sports as well, is having these moments of joy along that learning process.
Yeah.
So for a guitar, it's like you're not just putting together chord progressions over and over and over again. You
Mhm.
learn like a song. Maybe it's a simple song, but
Yeah.
you can entertain yourself, and then you push to the new level. And if you were to learn how to surf, for example, you get pushed in the white water that anybody can do.
Yeah.
You stand up, enjoy that, and then you start working on your skill set to get more advanced in that sport. And
Mhm.
I really like what you say in terms of look at what other people have done to find that path, and then provide yourself some little bit of moments of joy along the way, knowing that that path of learning, you're growing as a person as you're learning something new all the time. And
Mhm.
that in itself provides a lot of fuel to just kind of keep you going. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's something that a lot of people are pushed away from when they start learning things, is that it's, oh, this is too much work, this is too difficult, this is something that's yeah, it's kind of frustrating, maybe it would just be more fun to watch Netflix. But I think that the more you can get in the habit of doing this, the more that you can sort of take on these kind of projects and feel it becomes a reinforcing cycle, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know people, and not I'm not talking about extraordinary people, I'm just talking about ordinary people that I know in my life that have gotten on this cycle, and they're just always willing to learn new things. They're always picking up, whether it's a new sport or instrument, just because they have this fundamental attitude locked into their habits right now of, they do something and it wasn't that bad, and they got a little better at it, and it was interesting, and they got that experience, and that is what lets them go forward, versus other people that they really just only stay stuck with whatever they already know how to
Yeah.
do. They don't really progress beyond that. And so I think that's just such a great skill to be able to open up your frontiers and learn
Yeah.
new skills, subjects, things that interest you.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about one of the concepts that at least I saw you talk about was the shortest path straight ahead. A
Right.
lot of times is the path to go. And I'd love to get your perspective on that in terms of as people think about taking on new sports, new activities after the age of 30, sometimes you can kind of get caught in a rut, kind of get caught in that same thing. And a lot of times the impediments to making progress are just overthinking things.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the things that I found from looking at a lot of the research on learning is that transfer, which is when you learn a skill in one context and then you try to apply it into another, tends to be harder than people assume. And the problem is that if the thing that you're practicing is actually different at a kind of microscopic level from the thing that you actually need to be able to do, you often have problems in actually using in the real situation. So classic example of this is if you're using, let's say, the app Duolingo to learn a language, which is very popular. It often, on the mobile phone version, will give you a situation where on the phone, it'll give you some word or sentence you have to translate, and then it gives you buttons to tap that have the words in English or Italian or whatever language you're learning.
Yeah.
And the problem is that this is nothing like a real situation. In a real situation, you're not given some static sentence to translate and then a word bank to choose from. You actually have to remember the words from scratch. You have to pronounce them properly. The other person has to understand you. You have to pronounce them. And so there's a lot of little ingredients that go into it. Now, it would be okay if maybe, you were learning some component of something. I know for sports, people often drill things. So I'm not trying to say that drills are not useful. But rather, if this is all you're doing, this, tapping of words, and then you go to Italy and then you have to actually converse with people, you'll find that your actual ability is much lower than what you thought you had on your phone game.
Yeah.
And so the idea here is that because transfer is really hard, it's always good to kind of have this connection with the real thing that you're trying to do, what you're actually trying to do. So if it's a guitar, you probably want to play songs. If you're learning a language, it's probably to try to converse with people, for most people. If you are trying to learn a sport, it's probably to play games and enjoy it. And so again, it doesn't mean that if you're learning tennis, you shouldn't work on your backhand, but rather if you only do tennis drills and you don't actually play any games, you may be surprised that, oh, actually in the real game, it's different. And I haven't actually figured out a lot of these things. And so again, I think the mistake a lot of people make in taking on a lot of learning projects is that they like this sort of kind of easier environment, which doesn't really have a lot of the problems that you have in the real life situation.
Yeah.
And they just do that. And then they have problems later in actually transferring it. And so it can be quite tricky. You can get into traps there where you spend a lot of time working on something, but not actually making progress.
Yeah. And that's what, I like over the last, I'd say 10, 20 years, software development, not to change completely, but software development went from that shrink wrap where you'd have a very extensive marketing requirements document. You'd go away and you'd write code for a long period of time, and then you would release it and see what happened. Really shifted to be iterative software development, where you'd figure out what's the minimum viable product I could get out into the market. So test and see what people like it. And then you build from that experience. Instead of overanalyzing, you just do. And I think a lot of times when you're learning something, I agree completely with what you said in terms of research the smartest way to learn something. But then just go do it. Even when you know you're not going to be good, you're going to be just kind of okay. But getting that real feedback, I think really can help drive you forward.
And I think we often don't give ourselves permission to be bad at things. I think especially as adults, I know that, if you were to take some kid and teach them a new musical instrument or sport and they're terrible at it, you still like, oh, great, you did a great job. But we don't give ourselves that. We expect to be really, really good at it from the first day. And so I think the future really belongs to people that are okay at being terrible at things. It really does. And, we were talking about sports. I learned downhill skiing when I was 30. So that was a new thing for me. And it hurts a lot more when you fall down as an adult than when you're a little kid. But I think the idea was not, okay, I'm going to be good at this, but it's okay to be terrible at this. And I've talked to people that they do it and they're like, oh, I was really bad that first day. And they just have this aversion to going back and doing it. And so I think the more you can kind of fall in love with your own failures and your own kind of, oh, wow, I'm really bad at this, the more you can get into it and get past that and actually do it well. So speaking a language, you want to be talking like a caveman in the beginning. You want people to be like making fun of you for how bad you're speaking. That's not something to be afraid of, you know, to someone being like, oh, wow, your Spanish is terrible. I know it's terrible, but I'm speaking it. And so I think, I think that people get caught up on that. And I think there's also a mentality, a kind of perfectionist mentality, which I think is particularly prevalent in a lot of learning domains, that if you learn it wrong, like if you don't do it perfectly right from the start, you're going to ingrain these bad habits and then you'll never be able to improve, that they're going to calcify and you'll improve. And I've heard people say this from language learning to sports to many other domains, where the idea is that if you don't get it perfect right from the start, you're going to ingrain all these bad habits and then you're going to be ruined. You're never going to be able to learn it again. And this has not been true for me in anything that I've seen learned, that it's always been the case that when you do things, you're going to do them badly at the start and you're going to have to repair those mistakes. This doesn't mean to be flippant about it. It doesn't mean to say that, you know, you shouldn't strive to do it well. But I think that this attitude of perfectionism that I think is very often coming from people who have already mastered a skill and now they're working on refining their performance. And they want to kind of bring that back to the beginner's mindset and like, oh, well, if only I had done things perfectly from day one, I wouldn't have these problems now. But that's not how life works. You know, if you want to be a writer, you've got to write bad essays. If you want to be a skier, you got to fall down a few times. If you want to be a golfer, you got to hit some balls into the hedges, you know? And so I think you need to get started somewhere. And I think a lot of people are afraid of starting. And I think this creates far more harm than the sort of fear of calcifying some bad habits.
Yeah. And kind of bridging from that, one of the phrases that you had was like, you know, happiness is an expansion of possibility, you know, and I think as you look at trying to do your best to live a full, vibrant, you know, life, whatever that means to an individual, but that opening up possibilities, whether that's physical possibilities in terms of exercise, whether that's career, you know, possibilities by making shifts along the course that you might take during your career, to just your hobbies and everything. That saying resonates with me. So I think maybe as we wrap up, maybe you could talk a little bit about, you know, what that means to you.
Yeah, so I think a lot of us live a much narrower existence than we even realize, that we have these things that we like and these things that we're good at, and they fit in this little box that we feel comfortable in. And we don't even feel the boundaries of the box. The boundaries of the box get felt when we try something a little bit outside of it and it's a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe we're not that good at it. Maybe we don't have the talent for it. Maybe we say to ourselves, you know, I'm not a math person. I'm not good at languages, or I can only draw stick figures. And it's not just say that, you know, I'm not making a comment about talent. I'm not trying to say everyone can be Da Vinci if they wanted to be. What I'm saying is that we allow these very, very small barriers, and that's what they are, just very small barriers, to permanently constrain the sort of box that we live in. And so what I want to encourage people to do is to imagine a life where the box is a lot larger, and maybe that there's a way out of the box. And so the idea is that learning and knowing how to learn and really having the enthusiasm to take on a challenge that's outside of this box that you've set for yourself is the way that you can expand your possibilities for life. And I think this really is the feeling of happiness. We were talking about this peak experience of when you do something that you didn't think you could do before. That's one of the best experiences you can have. And this is not something that should be restricted to young children. This is not something that, you know, you should figure out all the things you're good at by the time you're 18 and then just stick with them for the rest of your life. You should feel this sense of that you have no idea the things that you could be good at. You have no idea that, you know, maybe you could speak 9 languages. Maybe you could become a world-class painter. Maybe you could do all these things. And to explore those spaces and explore these things, even if they're a little bit hard in the beginning. And so that's the sort of attitude I try to profess. And it's the philosophy I try to live my life by.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Scott, thank you so much for your time. For those of you who watch this video, we hope you like it. Please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel. I put a link down to Scott's book and to his website. If you want to follow up and read his book, it's great. If you want to learn anything more about what he has to say, he's written a crazy amount of articles. How many articles have you written over the years?
I think I just published 1,400. Number
Okay.
1400.
1400. That's a
Don't have to read all of them.
I want every one of them read in a report. But if you have any follow-on questions for either Scott or myself, just leave them below. We'll get right back to you. Scott, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to the Half-Life Nation. I really appreciate it. Keep up the good work, and I can't wait to see what's the next learning project. Is there a new one coming on, or is it too early to talk about?
Well, I just finished one where I was learning a new language, Macedonian, which is the language my wife speaks. So you can go on my blog. I have a list of all the projects I'm on. So that just got posted recently.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Take care.